The last thing I remember before the floor was the smell of soup. Chicken soup. I had been making it since 6 that morning, because my daughter was coming for dinner, and she had been tired lately. I could hear it in her voice on the phone. That particular exhaustion that young mothers carry like a second body. And I wanted her to walk into a warm house and smell something that meant someone was taking care of her. That was the last coherent thought I had before my legs stopped working and the kitchen tilted, and the linoleum came up to meet me with a finality that I did not argue with. I was 67 years old. I had been ignoring my body for 11 years. The soup was still on the stove when Robert found me. I am 90 years old, and I am going to tell you something that took me a very long time to understand, not because it is complicated, but because the simplest truths are always the ones we are most determined to avoid. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. I know. You have heard that before. It has been put on mugs and embroidered on pillows. I am not talking about that version. I am talking about the medical version. The version where a woman of 67 collapses on her kitchen floor because she has spent 11 years treating her own body as the last item on a very long list, and the list never got shorter, and so the last item never got reached. I know this better than most people because I lived it completely, and I am still living the consequences of it at 90 in the way I walk, in the medication I take every morning, in the particular way my husband Robert looked at me for the remaining 14 years of his life after the afternoon he found me on that floor. That look. That, more than anything, is what this story is actually about. I was not a woman who ignored herself out of carelessness. What happened was a decision, made repeatedly daily, with full awareness and complete conviction for 11 years. The decision was everyone else first. I was raised by a woman who never sat down. My mother Vera apologized for being sick, cooked dinner with a fever of 102 and called it nothing. I watched her for 18 years and learned, with the thoroughness that children learn things they are never explicitly taught, that a woman's pain is an inconvenience to be managed privately, and a woman's needs are things to be attended to after everyone else's needs have been met. I carried that lesson into my marriage in 1958. I carried it for 52 years without once examining it the way you examine a thing you received so young you forgot it was given to you. The signs started in 1956. Not dramatically. The way water damage starts inside a wall, invisible from the outside, slowly, consistently, doing damage that won't be visible until the wall comes down. I was tired. That was the first sign, and I dismissed it the way I dismissed everything that concerned only me, efficiently, without ceremony, with the complete confidence of a woman who has decided that her own discomfort is not a reliable narrator. By 1962, the tiredness had a companion. A pain in my chest that came and went, not severe, not the dramatic clutching pain of the films, but a pressure, a heaviness, something that arrived in the afternoons and stayed for an hour and then left quietly, like a visitor who knows not to overstay. I told no one, not Robert, not my doctor. Why didn't I say anything? I have asked myself that question for decades. At 90, I think I finally have an honest answer. I didn't say anything because saying something would have required stopping. And stopping even briefly, even for one appointment that was only about me, felt like a betrayal of everything I had decided was my purpose. Stopping meant admitting that the machine had a problem, and the machine could not have a problem because the machine was what everyone depended on. So I didn't stop. I made soup instead. By 1967, 11 years after the first sign, the pressure in my chest had become a permanent resident. Something I had so thoroughly incorporated into my daily experience that I had stopped registering it as unusual and started registering it as simply the way my chest felt. Not a warning, not a message, not 11 years of ignored correspondence from an organ that was trying, with increasing urgency, to get my attention. The morning I made the soup, I had not slept properly in 6 weeks. I knew something was wrong. I knew it the way you know things you have decided not to know fully, completely, in the part of yourself that doesn't have the luxury of pretending. My body stopped asking. It simply stopped, and I went down. Robert found me 40 minutes later when he came home for lunch. He walked into the kitchen, the soup was bubbling. I was on the floor and told me later, much later, that for one terrible fraction of a second, he thought I was dead. I was not dead. But something happened to Robert in that fraction of a second that did not unhappen. That is the part I need you to understand. The hospital was 3 days, then rehabilitation, then a diagnosis the doctor delivered in the careful, measured tone of a man who has learned to give difficult information slowly. Coronary artery disease, significant blockage, damage to the heart muscle consistent with a condition that had been developing for he paused some time. I asked him to be specific. He said possibly 10 years, possibly longer. I looked at the ceiling of that hospital room for a long time after he left. 11 years. I had known for 11 years and I had made soup instead. Robert came every day. Morning and evening, both. He brought things, a book I had mentioned wanting to read. The Good Hand Cream. Once a small bunch of flowers from the garden that he had clearly cut himself because the stems were uneven and too long, and he had wrapped them in aluminum foil because we didn't own a vase small enough to carry. He sat in the chair beside my bed and held my hand and talked about ordinary things. And I watched his face while he talked and I saw what I had done to him. Not the illness, not the diagnosis. What I had done to him by being a woman who collapsed on a kitchen floor without warning after 11 years of silence. Robert was not a man who showed fear easily. In 30 years of marriage, I had seen him frightened perhaps 3 times. He looked like that now, every day, sitting in the chair with aluminum foil flowers, and his jaw set in that particular way, the way of a man who has seen something he cannot unsee and is carrying it somewhere deep and private. I had done that to him, not the illness. Me, my silence, my 11 years of returned correspondence. I held his hand and understood for the first time with full clarity that my body was not only mine. That what I did to it, what I allowed to happen to it through neglect, and the lifelong conviction that my needs were the last item on the list, affected the people who loved me in ways I had never calculated, because I had never thought of myself as someone whose absence would leave a mark. I had thought of myself as the person who prevented absences in others. It had never occurred to me that I was also someone others depended on being present. The second moment came 6 months after the hospital. My daughter Patricia came to stay for 2 weeks to help. She was 38. 3 children of her own, a husband who traveled for work, a life that was full in the way lives with young children are full completely, without margins. She came anyway. I watched her move through my kitchen, finding the good pot without looking, knowing which burner ran hot, automatically putting the dish towel on the left side of the sink the way I had always put it. She had learned everything from watching me, not just the kitchen, everything. The way she checked on her children before she sat down, the way she answered the phone mid-task without stopping the task, the way she said I'm fine when I asked how she was sleeping quickly, automatically, with the practiced ease of a woman who has decided that her own tiredness is not a reliable narrator. My mother's words, my habits, my 11 years of silence passed down like good china, wrapped carefully, handed over without either of us noticing. I said, "Patricia, when did you last go to the doctor? For yourself, not for the children." She turned from the stove, looked at me with an expression I recognized completely because I had worn it myself for decades, slightly caught, slightly defensive. She said, "Mom, I'm fine." I said, "That is not what I asked." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 18 months ago, maybe 20. 3 generations, the same decision, everyone else first. The third moment was Robert, 2 years after the hospital. He was not sleeping. I knew it before he told me knew it from the way he lay still in the dark with the particular stillness of a man who is working very hard at something. One morning over breakfast, I asked him directly. He put his coffee cup down. He looked out the window for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "I keep seeing you on the floor." Just that. 4 years after the afternoon, he had walked into the kitchen and found me. He was still on that kitchen floor in his sleep. Still finding me. Still living in that fraction of a second when he thought I was dead. I had not known. He had never said. We had both been handed the same silence from different directions, and we had both carried it faithfully, and it had cost us both differently, privately, in ways we had not been able to show each other until that morning over breakfast. I reached across the table and took his hand. I said, "I'm sorry, Robert," not for being sick, for the silence, for 11 years of returned correspondence that had ended on a kitchen floor and taken something from him that sleep could not give back. He squeezed my hand. He never said it was all right. He was too honest for that, and I loved him more in that moment than I had words for. Robert died in 2009. I want to say that plainly before I tell you the rest, because the rest needs that fact underneath it, the way a building needs a foundation. He died on a Tuesday morning in March. Quietly in our bedroom, in the bed we had shared for 51 years. His heart simply stopped. The doctors said it was peaceful. I was holding his hand when it happened, and I can tell you that peaceful is the right word, and also that peaceful is completely insufficient for what it actually was. He was 79. He was in bed most of the time by then. He read in the mornings. He watched the birds from the bedroom window in the afternoons. He asked me to sit with him in the evenings, and I did, every evening, in the chair I had moved to his side of the bed, and which I have not moved back since. One evening, he asked me to bring him the box from the top shelf of the closet. I knew the box. A shoebox, old, the brand name worn off. He had kept it on that shelf for as long as I could remember, and I had never opened it and never asked about it. He held it in his lap for a moment without opening it. His hands were thin by then, the way old men's hands get thin, the skin loose over the knuckles, the veins visible. But they were still his hands. Still the hands I had held across 40 years of kitchen tables and hospital chairs and ordinary evenings that I had not known were extraordinary until they were gone. He opened the box. Inside were letters, 40, perhaps 50 of them, bundled with rubber bands gone brittle with age. Photographs, old ones, black and white. And at the bottom, a piece of paper folded in quarters that he unfolded carefully. With the concentration of a man handling something fragile, he held it out to me. It was a list. His handwriting. Dated 3 days after he had found me on the kitchen floor. October 1967. The list had a title at the top, written in capital letters, underlined twice. It said, "Things I should have said." I looked up at him. He was watching me with an expression I had never seen on his face in 51 years of marriage. Not sad, exactly. Not guilty. Something more complex, the expression of a man who has been waiting a very long time to hand something over and is finally, in the last weeks of his life, doing it. The first item said, "I should have made her stop." I saw the tiredness for years, and I said nothing because she seemed to need to keep going, and I didn't know how to tell a woman like Alina that it was all right to stop. The second item said, "I should have gone to the doctor with her, made the appointments myself, driven her there the way I drove her mother. I waited for her to do it herself, and she never did, and I knew she never would, and I waited anyway." The third item said, "I should have told her every single day that she mattered as much as the rest of us, that her body was not less important than ours, that the soup could burn and the house could be imperfect and Mrs. Paxkowski could wait one afternoon, and none of it was worth what I saw on that floor." I stopped reading. I could not see the page clearly anymore. Robert said very quietly, "I made that list because I needed to know what I had done wrong, so I wouldn't do it again." He paused. "I didn't do it again, but I never told you. I should have told you." I said, "Robert, why didn't you show me this before?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I thought if I showed you the list you would spend the rest of your life apologizing to me, and I didn't want your apology." He looked at me with complete steadiness. "I wanted you to be alive. I wanted you to be alive." 7 words. I sat in that chair in February with a folded piece of paper in my hands, and I wept in a way I had not wept since I was a young woman, completely, without management, without the careful containment that decades of everyone else first had built into the very structure of how I existed in my own body. Robert put his hand over mine. He didn't say anything else. We sat like that for a long time, the windows dark, the room warm, and I held his list, and he held my hand, and outside the world continued doing whatever the world does, while inside a bedroom, 2 old people sat with 42 years of unsaid things finally said. 3 weeks later, he was gone. I still have the list. There is a word I have retired. The word is selfless. For most of my life, I accepted that word as a compliment, the highest compliment, the one that meant you had done it right. Alina is so selfless. Said at church, at school meetings, by neighbors and friends and my own children with a warmth that I received like a medal. I understand now what that word actually describes. Selfless does not mean generous. Generosity is a choice made from fullness. You have something and you give it freely. Selfless means something different. Selfless means you have decided that the self is not worth keeping, that the self is an inconvenience to be managed privately, a body to be run until it stops, and then apologized for when it does. That is not virtue. That is disappearance with good manners. I disappeared for 11 years, slowly, quietly, with a clean house and a warm kitchen and dinner on the table every night. I disappeared into the accumulation of everyone else's needs until there was almost nothing left of a leaner who had desires and limits, and a chest that was trying to tell her something important for over a decade and deserved to be listened to. I was selfless. My husband found me on the floor. Those two things are not unrelated. Here is what I know now that I wish I had known at 56. Not at 67. By 67, the floor had already made its point. Your body is not the last item on the list. It is the list. Without it, there is no list. Without it, there is no soup, no school run, no Mrs. Paxkowski, no dinner on the table, no hand held across a hospital chair, no aluminum foil flowers, no ordinary evenings that turn out to have been extraordinary. Every single thing you do for the people you love is done by a body that requires maintenance, not dramatically, not constantly, but consistently, before the wall comes down and shows you the water damage that has been there for years. The problem is a word that women of my generation were given so early and so thoroughly that it stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like identity. The word is later. I will go to the doctor later. I will rest later. I will pay attention to this pain later, when the children are older, when things settle down. Things do not settle down. Later is the most dangerous word in the English language when it is applied to your own body. I applied it for 11 years. It nearly cost me everything. It cost Robert 42 years of a folded piece of paper in a shoebox. I want to speak to you directly now. Not to the version of you that is nodding along and thinking, yes, self-care, very important. To the version of you that is also, at this precise moment, ignoring something. Because I think you are. I think there is a tiredness you have been calling reasonable. A pain you have been filing under stress. A sign you have noticed and returned unopened. Because there are too many other things on the list, and stopping even briefly feels like a betrayal of everyone who depends on you being in motion. I recognize that feeling with every cell of my body. It is not virtue. When did you last treat your own body with the same urgency you would treat your child's? If your child was that tired, you would have them at the doctor within the week. If your child complained of that pain, you would not file it under stress and move on. If your child looked the way you look at 11 o'clock at night after the laundry is folded and everyone else is taken care of, you would sit with them. You would hold their hand. You would say, "This matters. You matter. We are going to fix this." Say it to yourself. Not later. Now. Because I did not say it to myself, and I ended up on a kitchen floor, and my husband of 41 years spent the rest of his life with a folded piece of paper in a shoebox that said I should have made her stop, and Robert was not a man who should have had to carry that. He was a good man who loved me well and deserved a wife who loved herself enough to stay standing. I was too busy being selfless to stay standing. We were taught, most of us, by women who were taught by women who were taught by women, that the measure of a good woman is the completeness of her giving. How much she gave, how little she kept. My mother Vera never sat down. I never sat down. Patricia stood at my kitchen stove, saying I'm fine in my voice with my words with my mother's conviction. 3 generations. The same lesson. Passed down like good china, carefully, lovingly, with the full intention of giving something valuable without anyone stopping to notice that what we were actually passing down was the permission to disappear. I am 90 years old. I am giving you different permission. Sit down. Go to the doctor. Make the appointment today, not next week, not when things settle, not after the soup is finished. Today, and when they ask how you are, tell them the truth. Not fine, not managing. The actual truth about the actual thing you have been returning unopened. You are allowed to be a person who needs things. You are allowed to be someone whose absence would leave a mark. You are allowed to be someone worth keeping alive. Not for your children, not for your husband, not for Mrs. Paxkowski or anyone else on the list. For yourself, just for yourself. That is not selfishness. That is the one thing my mother never taught me, and the one thing I am passing down now, at 90, in place of the china. The soup was ruined. Patricia told me later, weeks later, after the hospital, that when Robert called her from the hospital that evening, he had forgotten to turn off the stove. The soup had burned completely. The pot was ruined. The kitchen smelled of it for days. She told me this gently, expecting me to be upset about the pot. I wasn't upset about the pot. I was thinking about Robert standing in that kitchen, finding me on the floor, calling the ambulance, riding with me to the hospital, sitting in a waiting room for 3 hours not knowing, and somewhere in all of that, in the middle of the most frightening afternoon of his life, forgetting to turn off the stove. Of course he forgot. He was busy trying to keep me alive, and I had spent 11 years making soup for everyone else while my own body burned quietly on a low flame, and I told myself it was nothing. It was manageable, it would wait. It did not wait. I am 90 years old. I walk with a cane now. My heart works, after a fashion. With medication I take every morning at 7 o'clock without fail, an irony I have made my peace with. The woman who spent decades ignoring her body now measures her days in pills. The damage from those 11 years is permanent, present in every flight of stairs. Every morning when I stand up too quickly. Every winter when the cold makes everything harder. I carry it, not as punishment, as the specific, physical, daily consequence of a decision I made for 11 years without fully understanding it was a decision. It was a decision. And at 90, I want you to understand something about decisions made in silence. They do not stay silent. They find a way to speak eventually on a kitchen floor, in a hospital room, in a shoebox on the top shelf of a closet, in the jaw of a man you love set in a particular way for 14 years. Silence does not protect the people around you from your pain. It just changes the form the pain takes when it finally arrives. I still make soup. Slowly now, with the cane hooked over the counter edge and the medication already taken, and the doctor's number in large print on the refrigerator door because Patricia put it there, and I let her because I have learned, finally, to let people take care of me without calling it weakness. It took me until 68 to learn that. I wish it had taken less. I wish Robert had shown me the list in 1968 instead of 2009. I wish I had sat down before my legs made the decision for me. I wish I had understood 30 years earlier that staying alive was not the least I could do for the people who loved me. It was the most. Robert's list is in my bedside drawer, not in a shoebox, not on a shelf. In the drawer I open every morning when I reach for my medication. I read it sometimes, on the mornings when the cold makes everything harder, and the cane feels heavier and 90 years sits in my body with its full accumulated weight. I unfold it and read his handwriting, and think about a man who loved me enough to write down what he should have said and carry it for 42 years and hand it to me at the end. I wanted you to be alive. 7 words. I am alive, Robert. Still here. Still making soup. I just turn off the stove now.